You're about to watch an interview filmed this week with a theatre director, a very talented young woman called Flavia D'Avila. She has a theatre company called Fronteiras Theatre Lab. Flavia has been refused a visa to remain in this country. As you watch the interview, what you'll find is a very emotionally articulate young woman, a very prescient thinker, very talented. She actually innovates other people to think, to act, to explore through theatre art all the things that it means to be human. And specifically, as with Fronteiras, she is looking at borders and the concept of borders and exploring them. I really hope that you find time to watch the whole interview here. The story that unfolds is an incredible one. Flavia really built up a life here, and now she's being excluded from that life. Immigration is not a dirty word. Immigration, I think, should be reclaimed as being something that fosters cultural exchange, cultural understanding, helps towards reconciliation, conciliation. I really believe that immigrants don't let the country down. Public policy lets the country down. And I think we should widen sometimes our very narrow views about what immigration actually is.
I came to Edinburgh in 2006 to do my degree in drama and theatre arts at Queen Margaret University. So there are several different reasons why I came to Edinburgh. I wanted to go to an English-speaking country that was not England, the United States or Australia, because that's where everyone went and I don't like being conventional. So it was actually a suggestion of a friend who worked with me in Brazil at the time, who was actually English, born to Scottish parents. So she thought I would like Scotland, I would like the culture and the people. And then I started looking into it, I found out about the Fringe, and because I wanted to get into theatre, that sounded ideal. I also don't like big cities, and Edinburgh is just the right size. It's small enough so you can walk everywhere, you can just text your friend in the middle of the afternoon going, do you want to go for a coffee? Yeah. You don't have to book people 2 weeks in advance. But it's still a capital city, so you have everything that you need here. And then, I wanted to become a theatre director, so I found a course at QM and applied for that, was offered a place, and then I moved here.
So how did you find the theatre scene in Scotland? Is it a lot different to Brazil? Is there more opportunities here?
It is very different, and I have to say I don't know very much about the theatre scene in Brazil because I never got into that in Brazil properly. I trained here and I made my network of contacts here, and I learned to look at theatre professionally here.
And so what did you learn about the Scottish theatre industry? Is it a lot different from the theatre scene in Brazil?
Yeah, it's interesting because I never worked professionally within theatre in Brazil. I obviously went to theatre shows there and all that before coming over, but I trained here, developed my career here, I developed my network of professional contacts here, so I understand how the Scottish industry works, and I don't quite understand how the Brazilian industry works still. Now that I've been back there for 10 months, I've been trying to learn more about it, but one of the differences is obviously the sheer size of the countries, because Scotland is quite small. It's got 5 million people, and Brazil has 180 million people. So how many Scotlands can you fit into that? Obviously, we are also the country is divided into states after the North American model, and we have federal laws and rules, and then we have state level regulations, and then we have council level regulations, and it's all very confusing. To give you an example, the latest project that I worked with that was actually funded by Creative Scotland, the funding application for that was 14 pages long, and I thought it was quite straightforward. It was reasonably accessible language. I mean, I understood everything that the form asked for, and obviously we did get the funding. Now, just to have an idea, I remember when I was in Porto Alegre just a few months back, so that's the capital city of my home state in the south of Brazil. And just to compare and to try and understand how that works, I took the guidelines to apply for a tender funded by the Porto Alegre City Council. And that was a tender to direct a play for a German culture institute there. And only the guidelines for that were 35 pages long and really, really heavy legal language. I think I read 5 pages and I had no idea of what that was about. And that is my mother language, but it's very, very difficult to access. So that I think that we have a lot more bureaucracy in Brazil than in Scotland. Like I said, you have to sort of assess if you want to do things at your city level or state level or federal or country level, and that's quite big. It is difficult. I'm still processing, I'm still trying to learn how things work there. Another difference that I noticed is that we are not big on reviews. If you go to Rio, São Paulo, you will see reviews on the newspapers, but the majority of the media there, they'll publish features, and sometimes you can get sort of editors' choices of listings of things to go see, but we don't really do reviews, or not in the same way that we do here. And another thing is the equity equivalent, the sort of the trade union for artists. I've worked here for 6 years without being an equity member. I believe that it's important, and obviously it's great for actors because I'm working as a director and producer, and because I didn't really know what my status was, if I was going to be able to stay in the country. I never became an equity member, but that wasn't a problem for me. I could still work, and I could work with equity members. Now in Brazil it's kind of compulsory. You have to register with the trade union, otherwise you have absolutely no respect and no one is going to want to work with you. So I haven't registered in the past 10 months because I still don't want to stay in Brazil permanently. Obviously you have to, that's an investment. But I found that I can't really do any sort of freelance work if I wanted to run workshops there, or even if I want to compete for tenders and funding without being registered with the trade union, I can't.
So you're still kind of trapped, I guess, between
Yes.
one and the other.
Yes.
So tell us a bit about how you ended up back in Brazil in the first place and the kind of application process to try and come back.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I was here for 4 years on the student visa while I was doing my degree, and back then we still had the Fresh Talent program, which then became the post-study work visa by the time that I graduated in 2010. So I applied for the post-study work visa then, and I got that. So that allowed me to stay on for 2 years after my graduation. And it was a great idea because it allowed you to get the professional experience, to get contacts and all that. I just feel that it was more geared towards careers that will lead on to proper jobs, as we say. So obviously you would maybe get a traineeship or internship in a company and then work your way up. By the end of those 2 years, you would have been offered a job in that company and you'd stay on. Obviously, it doesn't really work like that in theatre and performance. It can work in some contexts, if you are working in a big theatre company, in a big building, but when you are producing your own work, and if that's the kind of thing that you want to do, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So I did have a job, a day job, that was fine. It paid my bills, it paid my taxes, but I didn't make enough money in that job to apply for a work visa under the new rules. So they changed everything between 2009 and 2011. So now you had to be working in a job that pays at least £20,000 a year, and your employer has to be approved by the Home Office, by the border agency, which was not the case of the job I had. I didn't make £20,000 a year. And I know that my employer at the time wasn't approved by the border agency because I had a colleague that applied for the work visa under that tier, and she didn't get it because it didn't approve of our employer. So that made things a bit harder. So they brought the exceptional talent visa route, which was very interesting, allowing artists to come and work in the UK for 3.5 years without having to prove that you earned a certain amount of money. So that was quite exciting to find out about. But I wasn't quite sure how that worked at the time. So that was the beginning of a really strange and stressful and quite damaging journey for me. I started looking into that about February last year, February 2012. And my first point of contact was a Citizens Advice Bureau near where I lived in Edinburgh. And made my appointment. I went to speak to the immigration advisor, and she didn't even know that visa category existed. And it was quite clear that I was more informed than she was, and she felt quite bad because she couldn't help me. And I had some questions. I had read the guidelines that I downloaded from the UKBA website, but things that weren't quite clear to me were if I could apply from within the UK or not, or if that involved moving back to Brazil, applying from there and waiting what could be up to 6 months according to their information on the website, or if I could just apply here and keep doing what I was doing while waiting. And another thing that wasn't quite clear is you had to have an endorsement from a competent body, and they named the Arts Council of England. But then because I'd been in Scotland for 6 years and I know how things work here, and I know that, for example, because my theatre company is Scottish, I can't apply for funding from the Arts Council of England. I have to go through Creative Scotland. I didn't understand why the Arts Council of England had to give me my endorsement for my visa. So those are the two things that I wanted to find out then. So this lady couldn't help me. And she suggested contacting the Arts Council of England directly. So I did write to them, and I just got a semi-automatic email back telling me to read the guidelines, which I had already done. So that wasn't really helpful. Then what I did was I found the contact to my local MP. I went to speak to him, and again, he didn't really know about the exceptional talent visa. He spoke to me quite quickly, and then he said that there wasn't much that he could do. What he could try and do would be to write to the Home Office and ask if, because I'd been here for 6 years and I had a theatre company and I was in this situation, if there was a way that I could apply in the UK without having to pack my 6 years of my life in Edinburgh and go to Brazil to do that. So I got a letter back from my local MP saying that he had written to the border agency and asked on my behalf if I could put the application in while still in the UK, and I never heard back from him or from the border agency, never heard anything else after that. So obviously the time came that my post-study visa was expiring and I had to go back to Brazil. So I did. I packed 6 years of my life in Edinburgh. I had to distribute things that I wanted to keep amongst lots of boxes, and thankfully I have excellent friends that were quite happy to keep my stuff for me. And then went back to Brazil for where I am until now. So I'm just in Edinburgh now and on tourist visa. What happened then was that I then applied for the exceptional talent visa. I went back at the end of September 2012, and I managed to get all the documents ready to send the application. And so I managed to get all the documents together to apply for the exceptional talent visa by the first week of January this year. And I sent everything in. Then I found out I also had to go to Rio in person to bring the documents and have fingerprint and photo taken and all that. So that's a new thing as well. I didn't have to do that for the previous 2 visas I had applied. So that was obviously extra cost that I wasn't quite prepared to cover at the time. Again, thankfully, I have family and friends that have been very helpful and were able to support me in that. But went to Rio, and when I say, I had to go to Rio from down south, that is a 2-hour flight. It's not next door. And we don't have low-cost airlines in Brazil. This is one of the things I miss the most. So went there, delivered the documents, the photos, the fingerprints and all that, and then went back to the south and waited. So took about 3 weeks for them to send me an email saying that my visa application had been rejected. But I got an email saying that, and they didn't really give me a reason. They just said it had been rejected, and a letter with the details would be sent to my home address. And so I had to wait another week to get there because I wasn't at my mother's house when I got the email. And it was a bank holiday because it was Carnival in Brazil, and when everyone should be partying and enjoying themselves, I was sitting in a corner pretending that everything was all right, but I didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't want to tell my family that the visa had been rejected because there would be questions that I couldn't answer. So I waited for that week, got back home, got the letter eventually, and then the reason for that application being rejected was that I hadn't provided a reference number that they told me themselves that I didn't need. So obviously I was quite angry about that. I printed off the email exchange I had with the border agency when I requested the reference number, and when the reply that I got saying you don't actually need this anymore, and I filed for an administrative review. Then again, waited for another 2 months until I heard the final result, because obviously I asked for an admin review, and then they phoned me a couple of days after saying that they accepted my admin review, so they're going to reassess my visa, my application. And that's when everything kind of really turned upside down, because about a week after that I got the news from Creative Scotland that they were going to fund a project that I wanted to do in Brazil. Since I couldn't come here to work with my theatre company, who are still based in Edinburgh, I decided to bring them to me in Brazil and work with them there. And then Creative Scotland very kindly funded that project, and that was fantastic to hear. That was great news at a time when everything was going really badly. So we started working towards the project. That was meant to happen in April. 3 weeks. The Scottish-based performers that I work with were going to be there working with me down south in the border between Brazil and Uruguay. And then it was halfway through that project that I then got the new letter, the new decision from the border agency saying that my visa application had been rejected, because the Arts Council of England decided not to endorse my application because they considered that I didn't provide sufficient proof of exceptional talent, and that was the grounds. They didn't really give me any more detail, and which also ensued. I didn't want to deal with that during the project because the project was going really well then. So after the project was finished and I filed my report and all that, I contacted the British consulate in Brazil and to ask how I could get feedback on the application thing. Why it wasn't enough proof? Why the proof was insufficient? How can I make it sufficient? And then the UK consul in Rio said that she had nothing to do with that the exceptional talent visa was a scheme that she didn't quite understand very well herself, and they just did the midfield, just got the document and sent it back to Britain. So she again suggested I contact the Arts Council directly. I didn't know who to write to, and then I just wrote a generic email to the Arts Council. I believe I sent it directly to the CEO. Again, just asking, look, this is the whole process I've been going through. I need detailed feedback on this so that I know if I am to make a new application, I want to know what I can do to make it sufficient. And then I got a reply from one of his PAs saying, this is not a scheme we manage. We have nothing to do with that. And then I wrote back to them saying, well, you are the responsible people for the endorsement. You are the design competent body. How is it that it's not a scheme that you manage? And then I got a reply from another person saying, no, my colleague is right. We have nothing to do with that. Which really left me in a very difficult situation, in this limbo thing. Like, well, it's just this pushing things to people and not really knowing where to go from there. So I got in touch with Manik Govinda from the Manifesto Club and Arts Admin down in London, and he suggested I file a Freedom of Information request. So I went to find out how to go about that, and he gave me the email address to do that, to ask for a Freedom of Information request from the Arts Council of England, and he advised me on how to word the email and all that. So I found the actual rules and regulations from the exceptional talent visa, and I had to quote that. So I wrote to this email address saying, well, according to law number such and such, article this and that, you guys are the sole responsible organ for this decision, and you have to have a record of this, and you have to keep it for 3 years after the decision. And under the Freedom of Information Act, I have the right to access this. And it was only then that they replied to me and said, okay, we're going to send you that information. But it was so tedious to have to go through all this. And it took me about a month to get that reply, and then another week and a half to get the actual details. And then it was something just really frustrating, because the feeling I got is that everything that you throw at them, they're going to refute, because it's an impossible visa to get. So the criteria are 3. One of them is media recognition. And then they said that what I sent was insufficient, because I only had a couple of reviews from the Scotsman, and everything else that I submitted that in terms of reviews and features about my work was online media, and they didn't really consider that as being proper sources. Then the second criterion was international context, work in international context. And because I submitted the application before I got the funding to do the project in Brazil, so I didn't have that. But they said that all my work had been in Edinburgh, apart from this one participation in an Italian festival a few years ago, and again, they didn't think that was enough. So again, Edinburgh is a pretty international city, and me being Brazilian, working in Edinburgh, and last year I put on a show that involved people from 8 different countries, including, and that show, part of that show was reproduced in China afterwards, but that wasn't international enough. And the third one was nomination for awards. And I had been shortlisted for a direction award in this Italian festival, but then their reason was that because they didn't really know, it wasn't clear about the status of this festival, they just didn't consider it. And I was also shortlisted for an entrepreneur award with the Scottish Institute for Enterprise last year with my theatre company, so that was shortlisted for a New Ventures award, but because it was an entrepreneurship award and not an artistic award, they didn't consider that either. So it gets to the point that you just laugh at it. And yeah, this has been the journey so far. Like I said, I'm here now on a tourist visa, just because I wanted to be here for the Fringe. I wanted to see my friends, catch up with my company, with the performers that I work with, and yeah, maybe see if I could make any other contacts that maybe could help me with this. So I don't really know what happens next.
Do you think it's harder for yourself because you're from Brazil, or do you think this is a situation that most people outside the EU are suffering from just now?
I think it's pretty much the same if you're outside the EU. Things that I've been following in the news, it seems like it's a lot worse from people from certain countries of Africa and Asia. The immigration rules can be quite horrible to those people, and I think that it doesn't really matter that much which country you're from as long as you're from outside the EU. Again, we also know that the UK is being quite horrible to people from Eastern European countries. So I think that it's a very horrible thing to say, and I feel bad about it, but I do think that I actually have a bit more respect because I'm white and I can speak English. So I heard horror stories before coming here as a tourist. Just now I heard these horror stories of people being deported back, or just trying to get into the UK to participate in workshops and just to even to travel for a while from countries like Thailand and other places that are a bit more remote, and being turned down there. And I was quite nervous coming here, but I have to say that even though I was held for questioning for 1 hour when I came here just now for this holiday, the immigration officer that dealt with me was very polite. She was very kind, nice and smiley. There wasn't a dark room in the back of the of the airport or anything of the like. Obviously, everything that she asked me, I could answer, and yeah. So I don't think it's anything against Brazilians in particular. There are the other nationalities that get you much worse.
But it must be quite horrible knowing that the country doesn't want foreigners here, and obviously being back in Brazil and having to deal with all that, it must be quite emotionally draining as well.
Incredibly.
So do you feel that there should be more support for you while you're back in your own country?
Yeah, it's hard to... I don't really have a solution for this because I know I wouldn't want to say that immigration can be a problem, and as we had talked about this before, it has become a dirty word, and I can't help but feel that I've done something wrong. Talking about being an immigrant, it's you don't want to say that, and it feels very strange because in the 6 years that I was here, I identified myself so much with Scotland and its culture and its people, and most of my friends are Scottish, and I've got a bit of a Scottish twang and all that. So it's weird thinking of myself as an outsider when I feel so right being here. And this is why it's been really difficult being back home. And yeah, I've had a few moments that were quite hard to deal with. The day that the Fringe program came out, I couldn't handle it, and this is why I knew I had to come here, just for a wee holiday, just to see people and experience the Fringe again. Even though it was the first time in 7 years I didn't have a show of my own at the Fringe, but the day the program came out, and obviously everyone on Facebook and Twitter, everyone that I know is talking about the Fringe and the brochure and the shows they're doing and all that, and I had a meltdown that day, which caused me to be bedridden on tranquilizers for 4 days, hoping that my brain would just melt and I wouldn't have to deal with that anymore. That wasn't pretty. Particularly for me, it was a very alien situation to be in because that had never happened to me before, and I am a very dynamic person. I'm always busy, and then not being busy for 10 months and just being this purgatory, waiting, it's been horrible. It's been very damaging, I would say. So yeah, it's difficult to say if there should be some sort of official support, because I'm obviously not the only one. There's loads of people that are in similar situations, but really it is a life that I built here that just started crumbling, and I was taken. It feels like I've been removed from my life, because obviously shit happens every day, people deal with it, but when you're removed from your usual network of support, and by that I mean your friends and peers that work with you, it's very, very difficult to cope. And I do have some friends in Brazil that are quite close to me, but because I've been away for 6 years, we kind of lost contact, and I can go and see them, but at different stages of our lives, and they all do different things as well. And although a couple of them have been quite supportive, the others are more along the lines of, you should just get settled down, you should get married, have a million children, a house, a car, and a proper job. and that is more or less the same that I keep getting from family, because that's sort of the natural course of things, particularly in Latin America. And that, the sort of Latin American family and macho culture just hit me in the face like a brick when I got back. Not used to that anymore. And then, all these things that are expected of you, that people start putting you under pressure for that. So I think it's tricky and probably not possible to offer some sort of official, public government support for people that are in the situation. The best thing they could do is just give us the visa. Allow me to come back and continue my work from where I stopped.
And obviously it works the other way as well, because a lot of people are losing you. Your theatre company doesn't have a director anymore, so is that still going here, or is it kind of lost without you?
They are not actually doing anything just now, because the project we did in Brazil was actually something I wanted to do anyway. It was not just because I was back there that it happened, because this is interesting as well. It is a project that happened in the border between Brazil and Uruguay, and it's a project exploring borders. Not so much immigration, but borders really, where people and things meet, and also the age and all that. And because that's a very unique place in the world, I wanted to do a pilot project over there, because it's a place I know well, it's where I'm from, it's where I grew up. I wanted to do this pilot over there and explore that border first. But after that, I would like to take Fronteiras explorers further and do similar explorations in different borders that might be not so easy or not so peaceful. There are many, numerous different borders around the world. But then, there's so many questions that we don't know about now, because even though it was great, it was very difficult to manage a project from abroad. Having half the company here, well, most of the company here, and me being in Brazil, and with me being in Brazil, having to deal with Brazilian and Uruguayan laws and the two councils of the two different cities, working in two different countries at the same time, working with local artists from both sides of the border. One of our performers was working in Spain at the time, one in London, and the rest of them were between Edinburgh and Glasgow. So everyone was scattered all over the place. And getting to manage all that, the logistics of all that, get everyone together, manage to get them across the world, and to work there for 3 weeks. So because, again, they're all scattered all over the place just now, they're sort of waiting for me to say, okay, this is what we're doing next. But I find it very hard to not have a solid base to go back to not have that central to operate from. So there are bits and bobs that we've been discussing now. I don't want to try and work, move on to a second stage of Explorers without having a solid base to operate from, because that was quite stressful to do. So I'm not gonna get into that until I know where I am, until I know where I have to be. Secondly, then we were analyzing a couple of things. There's one of the performers, Jessica Philippi. She is sort of working on developing a bit more her piece that she started devising in Brazil. I don't know when that's going to happen, or if that's going to happen anytime soon, but I know that she is working on that as a sort of a solo project. And another one of the girls, Gwendolyn Chatfield, she developed a workshop that is a Cayley and traditional Southern Brazilian dances folk fusion. So she's been doing that workshop around the UK. So that was another thing that came out of the project. And I've been talking to Elizabeth, which is the one that is based most of the year in Spain. And we might attempt at working on a solo project of hers via Skype. Not ideal, but so this is why it's hard not being together. We have to come up with all these creative solutions, but I don't think I can develop that project further without us being together.
What's the next step then? Are you going to reapply for your visa? Or?
I hope to, because I was told that the Arts Council of England might reassess their criteria for the visa, also because they are allowed to issue 300 of those visas per year, and I think last year they issued about 7, and they had received about 50 applications, so they're not even oversubscribed, because it's so much faff. People look at that and they look at the criteria and they think it's not worth it. It's a lot of money as well. It costs about £900 to apply. So it can't just be applying 2-3 times a year. One thing that they've already changed, which was quite nice of them, was they split the application process in 2. So now you apply for the endorsement first and you just pay half the fee. And then you only pay the rest of the fee if you get the endorsement. And then so that is, at least that made it better already. Now I've heard that they've got this project that should go through Parliament sometime this autumn to relax on the criteria a bit. So hopefully that will go through and get approved, and I might be able to apply again before the end of the year, now that I have the international project in my portfolio as well.
Why do you think it is so important to have this cultural exchange and people moving to different countries, and your project about the borders? Why do you think it's so important?
You see, because I was born and grew up in a border that is open and porous and peaceful, the concept is still a bit weird to me. And one of the things that happened during our project there, to give you an example, was we went into a Uruguayan primary school, have a chat with them, got the kids out and all that, and then the kids were all a bit shy, so I talked about the project, introduced the performers and asked if they had any questions. And the kids got a bit shy, they didn't really want to ask any questions. So I said, okay, let's do the following. Since these guys are here to study your environment, how about they ask you questions? So the performers started asking the kids the questions that they were interested in. So they're about 80 kids that were there talking to us. Then one of the girls asked how many of them were binational, how many of them were Brazilian and Uruguayan citizens, and a great majority put their hands up. Okay, and how many of you speak both Portuguese and Spanish at home? And almost all of them put their hand up. And then one of them asked, what does the border mean to you? And almost in unison they said nothing, because it doesn't actually exist. Well, you've been there, you've seen it. The physical border doesn't exist. There isn't any border control there, and yet you can tell that you are going from one country to the other. There are 2 joined together cities, but you cross the street, the language changes, the currency changes, the architecture changes. So you're keeping your national identity, but you're fusing with another country, and everyone's fine with that. And we've been like that for 150 years, 170 years. There was an interesting thing this year that happened. They hosted a festival of Arab culture in South America. There's a big Arab community there as well. So it's not just Brazil and Uruguay. You have quite a large Arab community, and you've got a small community of native Indians as well. But the Arabs the Muslims are mostly from Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon. And the Palestinian ambassador went to visit, and they took him up to the borderline, and he started crying because he never thought that there was a place like that in the world. So, and then again, if you think about it, human beings have always migrated. I mean, the people that are here now were not the original native people of Britain. The Romans came, and the Vikings came, and everyone came and went. And Britain was an empire, so they were being all over the world, same as Portugal and Spain. We are naturally migrant. It will be very difficult to find someone nowadays that is a pure breed through and through. So it's a natural thing, it's an organic thing. But it's equally organic, I suppose, to want to defend a piece of land that you have conquered. So you get protective of your own kind, of your own species, your own family, whatever it is. Because you fought for this piece of land, you want to keep it. But we're not really barbarians anymore, are we? I don't know. So I think that cross-pollination always works, and we know again from natural selection, if you start mixing things up, you have more of a chance to survive. And Edinburgh is home of the Fringe, of the International Festival. There were several stories this year about artists that weren't granted even temporary visas to come here for the festival to bring their shows. There was an artist that couldn't attend his own exhibition. There was a director that directed a show via Skype. She was refused a visa for the UK 3 times, and her show was nominated for a Total Theatre Award. So it's just silly, really, that this is getting in the way of people going about their work and their art and life.
Would you say you felt Scottish now?
I do, a little bit. I identify myself more with the Scottish culture than with what is stereotypically Brazilian. And one of the proudest moments of Fronteiras Explorers for me, for example, was when we hung up a saltire in a small community hall right next to the Brazilian and Uruguayan flags. So even though I was born and grew up in Brazil and quite like visiting there and all that, I feel much better here. There's obvious things like safety. And this is Edinburgh, really. It's not because it's Europe or Scotland. I think Edinburgh is incredibly safe. And just, there's a lot of things that make me feel much more identified with the people and the culture here. And like I said, I like small places. I prefer small places than large cosmopolitan cities. I mean, not because they're cosmopolitan, but because they're large. And I like being able to go to the pub and talk rubbish just talk nonsense with my friends, to chill, just impromptu like that, just going, oh yeah, what are you doing today? Haven't got any plans after work, let's go to the pub. Yeah, that spontaneity that you don't really have there. I find that mainly in Porto Alegre people go out to show off, they don't go out to have fun. You have to be wearing designer. Brazil is a country, this is something I'm very critical of. That image that we sell of a beautiful country, of beautiful people, it can be quite cruel if you don't fit that stereotype. And I definitely don't fit that stereotype, and I felt really bad about that. Every 20 steps there's a plastic surgery clinic next to a gym, and if you don't really conform to that, you're in for a lot of abuse.
What is your future if your visa is denied?
Well, I'm facing just now, I do have quite a few options to explore. Quite a few people have asked, can you go to Spain? Can you go to Portugal? Can you go to Italy? Technically I can go anywhere. Obviously, anywhere that is not Brazil will require a visa application process. When I don't know what other countries are like, they might be easier or more difficult than the UK. So that is one thing. Another thing is that wherever I go that's not Scotland will mean starting over again, starting from scratch. And mainly in your work in performance industries, you have to there's so much about networking and about knowing the industry, as we talked about in the beginning. And that takes time. So it took me 6 years to get to a point where I feel confident enough in my work that I can go and apply for funding. That was the first time that I got public funding for an international project. I involved several different partners here and in Brazil and in Uruguay and all that. And if I can't get a visa to come back and go ahead with this, what happens is I have to close the company, I have to cease to exist in Scotland, and then start existing somewhere else. But it will take about maybe 10 years to get to the stage where I am now. And and then you start thinking, do I want to do that? Do I have the energy to do that? And it's still not guaranteed that I'll be able to get to this stage. So other options obviously include, going to work on a cruise ship if I want to keep in the move. But then again, that's just an option for a temporary option, or potentially ending up having an academic career, which is again not something that I would be mad keen on doing. But it goes back to practicality. Yeah. So essentially, if I don't get a visa, everything that I've done so far here will probably just have to be binned.